Winners and losers from the 2025 NFL Combine. This year's draft is living up to the hype, as both the running back class and wide receiver class broke records for the fastest groups in NFL Combine history. Today, I wanted to talk about the biggest risers and fallers for this year's draft. Let's get right into it. The first guy that stands out as one of the biggest winners of the entire event is Texas A&M defensive lineman Shamar Stewart. He tested literally off the charts, setting the new record for relative athletic scoring, a perfect 10.0 on the RAS score. He measured in at 6'5", 267 pounds, and then ran a blazing 4.5940. But he followed that up with a 40-inch vertical, and he looked incredible in the drills as well. Everyone is going to bring up Shamar's lack of production in college. With just 4 sacks in 3 years, he has to learn to finish. But this is a guy who is still growing into his body, and whichever team drafts him can mold him into a game wrecker. I think he can stick at defensive end or move inside to three tech as well. He's still very raw and needs development, but he has every physical trait you could ask for. He's a lock to go in round one after his performance this week. Next up is Derek Harmon, the big defensive tackle from Oregon who ran a 4.9740. His tape speaks enough. But the one question people had was his movement skills. He put an end to that, running a sub 540 at 313 pounds. Harmon should also be viewed as a lock to go in the first round. The other defensive lineman that really had an awesome performance was Arkansas's Landon Jackson. I initially had him as a day two guy, but his stock is on the rise. He measured in at 6'6", 264 pounds, and ran a 4.6940, scoring a 9.88 on his RAS. His frame just looks like an NFL edge rusher, and he stood out in a very talented D-line class. I would actually be surprised if he doesn't end up going late first round. Other defensive linemen that caught my eye were Princely Umanamalayan, CJ West, and then Ty Robinson from Nebraska all had great days as well. A ton of talent in this year's D-line class. But the cornerback who really stood out was Maxwell Harrison out of Kentucky, running a blazing fast 4.2840. He had an awesome week at the Senior Bowl as well. Harrison now finished up an incredible offseason and looks like a lock to go in the first round. But the most impressive player of possibly the entire week was South Carolina's stud safety Nicholas Imanowori, the second player in this week's combine to literally set the record for athletic performances. Scoring a perfect 10 on the RAS score, this guy ran a 4.4 40-yard dash at 6'3", 220 pounds. He also has a 43-inch vertical, literally off the charts athleticism. This is a guy who's potentially the most athletic player tested in the last 20 plus years. He would have scored a perfect 10 at wide receiver or pretty much any other position as well. He's one of the most exciting players in the entire draft class. If you have not heard his name yet, check out his highlights and get ready to hear a lot more about him between now and April's draft. But possibly my biggest surprise of the entire combine was Kelvin Banks Jr.'s measurements. Everything I've read about Banks for the last year or longer has said his biggest weakness is his lack of height and that he has short arms. Most sites had him listed at 6'3" with 32-inch arms or even shorter. Well, guess what, guys? Everyone was wrong. Banks measured in 2 inches taller than what he was listed at Texas, coming in at 6'5", perfect height for a tackle in the NFL. And on top of that, also answering the question about having short arms. Now, he doesn't have the longest arms in the world, but he has 33.5-inch arm length, more than enough to suffice in the NFL. A full inch longer than Will Campbell's, and even half-inch longer than Josh Simmons, who was said to have longer arms. So Kelvin Banks Jr., simply by measuring in at the combine, was a huge winner. Some other offensive linemen that stood out, though, Missouri's Armand Mimbu, and then Georgia teammates Jared Wilson and Tate Ratledge as well. But the next standout player to me, Quinshawn Judkins was really that guy. He cemented himself as one of the top three runners in this class, behind Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton, and I wouldn't argue with anyone who had the top three arranged differently. All three of these backs are special, but Judkins was seen as a big guy who just wasn't as fast as his teammate Travion Henderson. But he ran a 4.4840 at 221 pounds and might have raised his stock into first round consideration. Quinshawn Judkins had an awesome week. But honestly, this entire running back class, except for maybe Ashton Genty, were winners at the combine. This is the fastest class of running backs ever recorded in combine history. The average speed of everyone who ran 40s came in at 4.48 seconds. This class of runners is not only extremely talented, but they can also just flat out fly. But it's not just the running backs. After setting the record for combine speed at the RB position, the wide receiver position would go on to have 10 players run sub 4.340s, which happens to also be a combine record, the most since 2003 when the NFL combine started. That record was just set last year at 9 players, but 2025 just broke it again. This is another great draft for wideouts. But the name of the game for the 2025 combine was speed. But let's go ahead and talk about the biggest fallers from this year's event. The first guy I wanted to talk about was Will Campbell, who actually tested off the charts athletically, but may still see his draft stock fall due to some things that are out of his control. Not only did he measure in with sub 33-inch arms, but on top of that, both Kelvin Banks Jr. and Josh Simmons may have passed him on some teams' draft boards. First, it was Kelvin Banks measuring in as almost a prototype at the left tackle position. But then Josh Simmons, who's been out with injury, had some workout videos posted on social media, and he's looking healthy as well. If he's 100% by his pro day like he said he will be, then Will Campbell might be passed by both of these guys on most teams' draft boards. The problem for Will Campbell right now isn't his tape. He is a great player and one of the top guys in this draft, but measuring in with sub 33-inch arms, and most teams are not going to want to play him at tackle. That is just a fact. There are only two, maybe three tackles in the entire NFL that have less than 33-inch arm length. And at least one of those guys has extremely broad shoulders, which kind of makes up for it. But Will Campbell did save his day by running one of the fastest 40s of the day, a sub 540, and he hit over 20 miles per hour as a 300 pounder. So while his chances of sticking at tackle in the NFL definitely went down, he should still be a lock to go in the first round. Next up is a guy who's falling a little bit due to not working out. Walter Nolan, another guy I really like, and to me, the tape is what really matters. But every year, guys start to trend up or down after the NFL combine. And this year, it seems like Nolan might be trending down a bit. So after kind of disappointing at the Senior Bowl and then not working out at the combine, Walter Nolan's stock seems to be falling. This is a guy who needs to come back and have a good pro day because I thought he was a guy who could generate enough buzz to climb all the way up to being a top 10 pick. Right now, that just does not seem to be the case. He needs to turn things around. But to me, the biggest loser of the event might have been Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver from Texas. Now, let me explain here. From first look, he ran a 4.4 40-yard dash, and you'd have to say no way. But listen, honestly, I don't like when people overhype themselves or talk up something and then underperform. And let's go back 1 year. His teammate, Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy, ran a 4.21 40 and broke the record at the NFL Combine. And Isaiah Bond immediately tweeted out that he would run a 4.20 and that he would be faster. And you can't talk about being the fastest guy alive when you aren't even the fastest or the second fastest wide receiver on your own team. Bond came nowhere near Worthy's record. In fact, his own teammate, Matthew Golden, ran a full tenth of a second faster than he did and was a lot closer to Worthy's record. So if Bond wouldn't have talked up running a 4.2, then his 4.440 would have been great, but he simply failed to live up to the expectations that he set. And then next up is Tez Johnson, who might have really hurt his draft stock. A guy who is said to have blazing speed ran times of 4.55 and 4.51. His quickness is there, but his home run speed is definitely in question. He scored a 5.10 on his RAS score, but this is a guy that Daniel Jeremiah labeled as can flat out fly and even compared him to Tank Dell. But then Tez went on to run the slowest 40-yard dash ever from anyone close to his size at the NFL Combine. A major disappointment from Tez. This might be the best running back class I've ever seen. So when scouts and GMs had a chance to see Caleb Johnson, Quinshawn Judkins, Omarion Hampton, RJ Harvey, and all these other guys have great days, while Ashton Genty stood on the sidelines, and you have to wonder if that makes them question it. Now, to be fair, Genty doesn't really have anything to prove at the combine, but after measuring in at just 5'8" and then seeing all of these other running backs, I believe other GMs might question spending a high pick on Genty. Let me know what you guys think about this week's NFL Combine. I'm currently working on more NFL draft position rankings. Being able to get measurements and athletic scoring for most of this class really helps, especially stacking up the draft board. Let me know what you guys want to see next. Please remember to hit that like button for me. And until next time, stay tuned for more.